Imagine a city that felt no urgency to leave its mark. A city that neither built towers to scrape the heavens nor armies to carve its name across maps. A city where time moved softly, almost like a whisper, and where the rest of the world thundered forward, but this place remained still. If history is often told through noise, through battles, inventions, revolutions, then this was a place that lived in the quiet between those sounds. They call it the city that slept through history. The Valley of Silence. Nestled in a valley far away from the crossroads of trade and war, this city was shielded by rolling hills and quiet rivers. Unlike other places, no caravans of merchants thundered across its gates. No foreign banners were ever planted in its soil. It was not poor, nor especially wealthy. It was not forgotten because it failed. It was forgotten because it never seemed to try. While kingdoms rose and crumbled, while great rulers sought to bend the world, this city went about its quiet rhythm. Bakers baked. Farmers tilled their soil. Children played along the narrow lanes. Generations passed as though each was a reflection of the last. It was a place where life was lived, but not recorded. A life without headlines. Imagine being born in a place where nothing extraordinary ever seemed to happen. No great fire to mark the centuries. No invasion to reshape the streets. No inventions born here that travel beyond its walls. The city's chronicles, if you could even call them that, were more like family notes. Who married whom, how the harvest went, whether the winters were long or short. To the people who lived there, it was enough. They didn't feel deprived. In fact, many might have seen their stillness as a blessing. Other towns nearby had scars to show. Monument half destroyed by war. Markets rebuilt after fires. Graveyards filled with names of battles long forgotten. But in this city, graves told only of age, of sickness, of time's natural passing. The outside world moves on. Beyond the hills, the world was on fire. Empires were born in dust and ended in blood. Kings declared wars that redrew maps again and again. The printing press changed how knowledge spread. Sailors crossed oceans and discovered lands that would alter the course of history forever. And yet, here, none of it mattered. The city had no navy to send, no armies to march, no universities to publish books. Its role in the great story of humankind was not even as a side character. It was simply absent, like a page left blank. The architecture of quiet. If you walk through its old streets today, what you notice is the stillness of design. Houses built of stone and wood in simple, repeating forms. Narrow streets winding gently between them. A church that never grew larger than it needed to. No grand palaces. No cathedrals with towers scraping the sky. Every building looks as though it was built not to impress the future, but simply to serve the present. Doors worn by generations. Windows reshaped over time, but never decorated with the flourishes of wealth. It feels like walking through a living memory, where each corner is familiar, but none are dramatic. Why did it sleep? Historians have debated endlessly. Why did the city remain so silent? Was it geography, tucked away from the routes of armies and trade caravans? Was it choice, a conscious decision to remain apart from the noise of ambition? Or was it chance, a quiet accident of history that left this valley untouched? The truth is likely a mix of all three. Its hills shielded it. Its rivers flowed quietly but did not connect the great seas. Its leaders, such as they were, never sought more than to keep peace among their people. And once a place finds itself outside the storm of history, it often stays there. The people who called it home. And what are the people? They were not dull, not lifeless. Their laughter echoed in the streets. Their festivals lit the evenings with firelight. They sang songs, though no one wrote them down. They told stories, though none traveled beyond their borders. They were human in the fullest sense, but in the eyes of historians, who measure importance by change and conflict, they were invisible. A farmer in the city tilled the same soil his father did, and his son after him. A baker's hands shaped bread the same way for centuries. These were not people who sought to break tradition. They found comfort in repeating it. A city without dates. To walk through its history is to realize how few dates exist. Other cities are measured by moments. A founding year, a battle fought, a cathedral completed, a revolution declared. Here, the years blur into one another. Ask a villager what happened in the year a famous king was crowned elsewhere, and he would shrug. Ask what changed during the time explorers crossed oceans, and he would point to a slightly better harvest that year. In this city, time did not stop. It simply drifted, like a river flowing gently with no rocks to stir its surface. And yet it survived. What is remarkable is not that the city was forgotten, but that it endured. While empires shattered and monuments crumbled, this little valley town carried on. No conqueror burned it down, no famine erased it. Its anonymity was its shield. While the world's brightest lights burned hot and burned out, the city glowed dimly but steadily, century after century. The mystery of silence. For travelers today, the silence of its history is haunting. Walking its streets, one feels both the weight of time and the absence of it. How can a place be so old, yet leave behind so little? How can human lives, lived fully, pass without the larger world ever noticing? Perhaps that is why it fascinates us. It is not the history of war or conquest, but the history of ordinary life stretched across centuries. And in a strange way, it asks us, is greatness only found in noise? Or is there something powerful in the quiet endurance of a city that chose to sleep? The rhythm of days. Life in the city flowed with the ease of a gentle stream. There was no rush, no race against time, no hunger to outpace neighbors or rival towns. People rose with the sun and rested with the dusk. The mornings began with the scent of bread baking in ovens, a smell that must have been identical 100, even 200 years earlier. Streets filled with quiet footsteps. Farmers heading to fields. Children trotting to small wooden schools where letters and numbers were taught not for ambition, but for simple usefulness. Every sound carried the same softness. The creak of carts over cobblestone, the bleating of goats, the chatter of neighbors who knew one another's families for generations. To outsiders, it might have seemed monotonous. To those who lived here, it was life itself, stable, predictable, safe. The market square. At the heart of the city was a modest square. Not grand, not sprawling, but sufficient. Here merchants displayed fresh produce, crafted goods, or hand-woven fabrics. Coins exchanged hands, but rarely in large amounts. Trade was not about profit, but about maintaining balance. The butcher knew his customers by name. The weaver remembered the sizes of children from one season to the next. Other cities' markets were alive with noise. Hawkers shouting prices. Foreign traders arguing over tariffs. Guards keeping order in the chaos. Here, the market sounded more like a gathering of friends. Deals were struck with handshakes more often than haggling, and disputes were rare. The city had no need for elaborate contracts, because trust was its unwritten law. The seasons is history. If you asked the people to describe their history, they would not tell you of kings or wars. They would tell you of winters that froze the river, summers that burned the fields, springs when blossoms seemed endless, and autumns when harvests were heavy or light. The calendar was written in the soil, in the trees, in the weather. Children grew up learning to read the sky, and to smell the wind more than the chronicles of distant rulers. Old men remembered years by how harsh the snow had been, or by when the rains came early. In this city, nature itself was a historian. Festivals of the ordinary. Despite its quietness, the city was not without joy. Each season brought festivals, not to celebrate victories or rulers, but to honor the turning of time itself. In spring, garlands of flowers adorned doorways, and children carried baskets of blossoms through the streets. In summer, people gathered in the square for music played on wooden flutes and simple drums, dancing barefoot until the stars filled the sky. In autumn, the harvest festival turned the market into a sea of fruits, bread, and roasted meats. Families ate together in long communal tables, sharing more than they kept. Winter celebrations were quiet but warm. Candles flickering in windows, songs sung softly by hearths. No festival made it into grand history books, but for those who lived them, these were the markers of life. Each one tied them closer to one another, to their land, to the cycle of existence. Generations without change. A curious thing happened in this city. Lives overlapped almost seamlessly. A child born here could expect to live much the same life as his father, and his father before him. Professions passed down. The son of a carpenter became a carpenter. The daughter of a baker learned the oven's secrets. This was not forced. It was natural. The rhythm of life was so steady that to change direction felt unnecessary. And so, traditions hardened, not out of stubbornness but out of comfort. Weddings were celebrated the same way for centuries. Births followed rituals unchanged by time. Even the prayers spoken in small stone chapels were nearly identical from one generation to the next. To outside historians, the sameness seemed dull. To the people, it was continuity, a reassurance that their lives were anchored, that nothing could easily shake them. The shield of isolation. Isolation was not absolute. Occasionally, a traveler would arrive, a wandering merchant, a lost pilgrim, a soldier who had strayed from his path. They would marvel at the stillness, the unhurried pace, the lack of ambition. Some stayed, drawn by the peace. Others left quickly, eager to rejoin the restless march of history. But for the most part, the hills shielded the city from the chaos of the outside world. Wars raged just a few valleys away, yet their sounds never reached here. Epidemics spread across continents, yet often faded before crossing the city's natural barriers. Empires sent emissaries across lands, but rarely saw reason to send one here. What would they have gained? No gold mines, no armies to ally with, no strategic roads to seize. The city was, in the eyes of the world, unimportant, and in that insignificance, it found its safety. A city without fame, yet with peace. It is easy, from a modern perspective, to judge this city as backward. After all, it did not produce great thinkers whose names echo in classrooms today. It did not build monuments that tourists now admire. It did not fight battles that shaped the fate of nations. And yet, Ask yourself, how many cities remembered in history are remembered for peace? How many lived through centuries without being scarred by conquest or crushed by ambition? In its silence, the city preserves something rare, the ability to live without fear tomorrow, the paradox of forgetfulness. The city's story raises an unsettling question. Is history only written by noise? If so, then the city's greatest achievement, its silence, became the reason it was forgotten. The world remembers wars, not peace. It remembers rulers who demanded monuments, not towns that built only what they needed. And yet, for the people who lived here, memory was never about fame. They remembered their grandparents' songs, their father's fields, their mother's kitchens. They remembered the smell of bread, the taste of spring water, the laughter of friends. What they lacked in written chronicles, they held in living memory. Time's gentle hand. As centuries passed, little changed. The same market square, the same streets, the same festivals repeating like verses of an endless poem. Even today, when you walk through its remnants, you feel less like a visitor in ruins and more like a guest in a timeless dream. Time touched the city gently. It did not scar it with battles, did not crown it with monuments. It simply let it drift like a leaf floating on a still pond, content to remain where it was. And that is why it is called the city that slept through history. Whispers of the outside world. For generations, the city had existed like an island surrounded not by water, but by mountains and forgetfulness. Yet time has a way of seeping through even the strongest barriers. In the late years of its quiet existence, word of the outside world began to arrive more frequently. Travelers carried stories of distant kingdoms, inventions, and revolutions. Children gathered at the edge of the market square to listen. They learned about ships that could cross oceans, clocks that ticked with uncanny precision, and empires that stretched across continents. To them, it sounded less like news and more like fairy tales. The people nodded politely, then returned to their routines. After all, their bread still needed baking, their fields still needed plowing. A stranger who stayed. Among the wanderers who passed through, one in particular changed the rhythm of things. He was not a soldier, not a merchant, but a scholar, carrying nothing but books in a worn leather bag. He arrived one spring morning and decided never to leave. The townspeople welcomed him with their usual warmth. He marveled at their traditions, at the way time seemed suspended here. Slowly, he began to record what he saw. Festivals, rituals, family stories. He filled journals with careful notes, sketches of the market square, even maps of the valley that cradled the city. To the people, his scribbling was curious, even amusing. Why write down things that everyone already knew? But the scholar saw something rare, a living culture unbent by conquest, unscarred by the relentless march of ambition. He sensed that outside these hills, such places were vanishing. The first touch of change. Change crept in not through war, but through curiosity. The scholar exchanged letters with colleagues in faraway towns. Occasionally, a parcel arrived, a book, a strange tool, a coin stamped with a king's face unknown to the city. Children rushed to see these treasures, their eyes wide with wonder. A farmer's son once held a small pocket watch, its gears ticking steadily. He had never seen time measured so precisely. Why would anyone need this, he asked. The sun tells us when to wake, and the church bells tell us when to eat. To him, the watch was less a marvel and more a puzzle. But seeds of curiosity had been planted. Slowly, whispers began. Perhaps the city could learn something from the world beyond. Perhaps history, long kept outside, might one day find its way in. The balance of tradition and curiosity. And yet, the city resisted rushing forward. Its people were cautious. They valued what they already had: peace, stability, community. To them, the outside world seemed noisy, unstable, dangerous. They had heard tales of wars that devoured thousands, of kings who demanded taxes until their people starved. Why invite such troubles? So they struck a balance. They allowed small changes, a book in the library, a tool in the workshop, but kept their traditions intact. Bread was still baked as it always had been. Festivals still marked the turning of seasons. Children still played in the same squares their grandparents had once danced in. It was not rejection of progress, but a careful filtering. They took what would serve them, and left behind what would disturb their peace. Discovery by outsiders. Eventually, news of this hidden city reached beyond the scholars' letters. Explorers, historians, and travelers grew curious. Could it be true that a community had lived untouched, almost invisible, through centuries of upheaval? The first groups arrived hesitantly, climbing the winding paths into the valley. What they found astonished them. It was not ruins, not a lost civilization, but a living, breathing town, simple yes but vibrant. People greeted them with open hands and smiles, offering bread, fruit, and stories. To the outsiders, it felt like stepping back in time. Here was a place where carriages still rolled over cobblestone, where candles glowed in windows, where neighbors knew each other's names across generations. It was as though they had walked into history itself. The world's reaction. Word spread quickly. Scholars wrote papers. Artists painted scenes of the square. Journalists marveled at the simplicity of life there. Some romanticized it as a paradise untouched by time. Others dismissed it as irrelevant, a relic destined to disappear under modern pressures. But for the city itself, little changed. Visitors came and went, but the rhythm of life remained. Farmers still tended their fields. Bakers still filled the air with warm bread. Children still laughed in the streets. If anything, the townspeople were amused by how fascinated outsiders seemed with their ordinary days. Why would anyone travel so far? An old woman once chuckled, just to watch us bake bread and hang laundry. The fragile gift of forgetfulness. Yet even as discovery grew, so did the danger being swallowed by the modern world. Roads could be built. Merchants could flood in. Politicians might see opportunity in this peaceful valley. The very attention that celebrated the city threatened to change it. Some outsiders argued it should be preserved exactly as it was, like a museum frozen in time. But the people were not relics. They were alive, breathing, laughing, loving. They did not want to be caged in their own traditions. And so quietly they found their own solution, to share pieces of their story, but not surrender entirely, to allow visitors, but not let them rewrite the rhythm of their days, to remain themselves, even under the gaze of the world. The true legacy. The city's greatest lesson is not in its architecture, nor in its festivals, nor even in its remarkable survival. Its lesson lies in its choice. The choice to live slowly when the world demanded speed, to value peace over power, to let centuries pass without demanding to be remembered. In a world that often equates importance with noise, this city chose silence. And in doing so, it preserved something rare, a glimpse of life unbroken by ambition. Perhaps that is why, even after being rediscovered, the city still feels like a dream. You walk its streets and hear the echoes of centuries, not in the roar of history, but in the quiet hum of everyday life. A city that lives on. Today, when visitors arrive, they often ask the townspeople about their past. What did you do during the wars? During the rise of kings? During the revolutions? The people smile and answer simply, we lived, we baked bread, we raised children, we told stories, we slept and woke and worked and loved. That was enough. And perhaps, in the end, that is why this place is remembered, not for shaping history, but for surviving it. It is a city that slept through history and woke up unchanged. The first spark of light. One evening, long after the sun had set, the valley glowed in a way it never had before. It wasn't the soft flicker of candles, nor the warm orange shimmer of oil lamps. It was steady, white, and almost too bright to look at. For the very first time, electricity had reached the city. Children gasped as wires hummed and lamps along the square lit up all at once. An old man whispered, "It looks like the stars have fallen to live among us." The townspeople stood in awe. For centuries, night had been marked by firelight, gentle, dancing, alive. Now the darkness retreated in silence, replaced by a glow that seemed eternal. Some welcomed it eagerly, others hesitated. A baker muttered, "Candles are enough. Do we really need this?" But when she saw her ovens working faster, her doubts softened. Change, like light, was difficult to resist once it had entered a room. The iron road. Soon after came the sound that shook the valley, the low, rolling thunder of a train. For centuries, only footsteps, horse hooves, and wagon wheels had echoed off the cobblestones. But now steel rails sliced the mountains, bringing with them a beast of smoke and iron. The first time arrived, people climbed rooftops to watch. Children clapped as the train screeched into the small news station. Merchants cheered. The outside world had never been so close. Suddenly, silk, spices, and even newspapers from faraway cities arrived in hours rather than weeks. But not everyone celebrated. Some feared the iron road would carry away the peace they had guarded for generations. An old shepherd shook his head. Once the mountain lets a road, it cannot ask the world to leave again. And he was right. The world had found a way in. New voices, new faces. With the train came strangers who no longer needed weeks of travel to arrive. Tourists wandered the streets with notebooks, sketching rooftops and fountains. Entrepreneurs eyed the market square, whispering about opportunity. Townsfolk were kind but cautious. They offered bread, guided visitors to the inn, but kept their daily lives steady. To them, strangers were just that, passing shadows. Yet slowly, new ideas took root. Children brought home stories of faraway inventions, bicycles, photography, telegraphs. They begged their parents for these marvels, their eyes alight with excitement. The older generation worried. If we changed too much, they asked, will we still be ourselves? The battle between old and new. It wasn't a violent battle, but a quiet one. Fought in kitchens, at dinner tables, and in the marketplace. Should houses be rebuilt with modern designs, or should the old stone and timber remain? Should the church bells still mark the hours, Or should pocket watches decide the rhythm of the day? Some families embrace progress fully, installing electric lights, buying sewing machines, even dressing the fashions of distant cities. Others clung fiercely to the past, wearing the same hand-woven clothes and cooking with wood-fired stoves. The city found itself split not in anger, but in perspective. One side whispered, "The future is coming. We must step forward." The other answered, "The future can wait. Our peace must stay." A moment of fear. Change always brings unease. One winter, a merchant from the outside world proposed building a factory in the valley. He spoke of jobs, wealth, and connection to global markets. To him, it was progress. But to the townspeople, it was a threat. A factory would mean smoke, noise, endless labor, and strangers flooding their home. They gathered in the square, debating long into the night. The factory promised opportunity, but at what cost? At last, they chose as they always had, gently, together. The city declined the offer. Their decision was simple. Wealth meant little if it destroyed the quiet rhythm of their days. The merchant left frustrated, but the townspeople returned to their fields with relief. The quiet compromise. Over time, the city learned how to bend without breaking. Electricity lit the streets, but candles still burned in windows. Trains brought visitors, but the square still belonged to the people. New inventions were welcomed, but not at the cost of tradition. Children studied modern books at school, yet still listened to old folktales before bed. Farmers used stronger plows, but still blessed their fields before planting. Bakers learned to use faster ovens, but still kneaded dough by hand, singing the same songs their grandmothers had sung. It wasn't about rejecting the future. It was about taming it. They would let the world in only as much as they wished, no more, no less. The lesson of the valley. As decades passed, the city became something unique. Not ancient, not modern, but a blend of both. Travelers marveled at how time seemed to slow the moment they arrived. Here, one writer observed, progress walks at the pace of people, not the other way around. And that was the city's secret. While the outside world raced toward industry, war, and endless ambition, this valley chose another path, measured, deliberate, peaceful. For every spark of electricity, there remained a candle. For every train whistle, there remained the sound of bells. For every new face, there remained the warmth of neighbors who had known each other for generations. An enduring identity. By the turn of the century, the city was no longer invisible. Maps marked it, trains reached it, books wrote about it, and yet it never lost itself. It remained a city that had once slept through history, now awake but still dreaming in its own rhythm. Visitors came, curious to see how a place could live both in the past and the present. They found not a contradiction, but a balance. A city that could glow with electric light, yet still pause to watch the sunset. A people who could welcome the world, yet still keep their hearts anchored in home. The city had proven something rare, that one can embrace change without surrendering identity. That history is not only about battles and kings, but about ordinary lives choosing peace, even in a noisy world. The world at war. The year was marked by thunder beyond the mountains, yet it was not the thunder of storms. It was the noise of cannons, the clash of nations tearing themselves apart in wars that spanned continents. The newspapers carried headlines that felt unreal to the valley. Empires collapsing, soldiers marching, cities burning. In the quiet city, life went on almost untouched. No armies trampled the cobblestones, no bombs fell from skies. Yet, the people were not blind. They listened to the echo of war carried by trains and whispers from travelers. The innkeeper often said, "The world outside is fighting to be louder than itself, but here, silence still wins." Still, even silence could not fully protect them. Some young men left, swept by the call of duty. They carried the city's blessings in their pockets. Small charms, family letters, sprigs of lavender from the fields. Not all of them returned. When news of losses reached the town square, bells tolled slowly. The valley mourned quietly but with dignity. They had lost sons to wars that were not their own, yet they honored them with the same reverence as if they had defended their very gates. The age of industry. While wars raged, factories multiplied across the globe. Iron towers rose in distant cities, smoke thickened in the skies, and machines replaced hands. The valley could not ignore it forever. Merchants argued that they needed more industry to survive. "We must not be left behind," they said. "The world is moving faster than we can imagine." But the council of elders met under the shade of the old oak tree, as they had for centuries. Their reply was simple. "We do not need to race. Our fields feed us. Our trade sustain us. Progress that takes away our peace is no progress at all." So, instead of factories, they allowed only small workshops. A carpenter gained a new saw powered by water, but he still carved chairs by hand. A seamstress bought a sewing machine but continued to stitch with patience. Machines helped, but they did not define. The valley had seen the frenzy of the world and chose a quieter rhythm. Visitors of curiosity. As the wars ended and nations rebuilt, travelers came more often. They arrived not for trade, but for escape. Poets, painters, and dreamers climbed off the train seeking something the outside world had lost. Stillness. They wrote in diaries, painted the valley's light, and called it the city that time forgot. One artist stayed a whole year, filling his canvas with the sight of golden fields bending in the wind. Another writer declared, "Here, I remember what it means to breathe." The townsfolk welcomed them with kindness, but never let their fame change them. For while the visitors carried the valley story back to the world, the people continued their routines, baking bread, ringing church bells, gathering the square at dusk. They knew that beauty lived not in being admired, but in being preserved. The temptation of wealth. With fame came temptation. Investors arrived, offering to build grand hotels, wide roads, even an airport. They promised fortune, saying the valley could be the jewel of tourism. For a moment, some were tempted. A farmer thought of easier days. A shopkeeper dreamed of more coins. But when the council gathered, they asked one question. If we trade our silence for wealth, will we still recognize ourselves? The answer was clear. They refused the projects. Visitors could come, but the city would not bend into a spectacle. The people chose contentment over excess, peace over profit. It was not stubbornness, but wisdom, the kind only centuries of slow living can teach. The second storm. When the Second Great War began, fear touched the valley again. This time, the noise was closer. Troops moved across borders, and whispers of invasion spread like cold wind. The city prepared quietly. Families stored grain, bells were silenced at night, and lamps were dimmed. Yet, the valley's hidden geography, its mountains and forests, shielded it once more. Soldiers passed near, but never entered. Still, the war left scars. Refugees fleeing destruction found shelter in the valley. They arrived broken, hungry, and afraid. The townsfolk opened their doors, sharing bread, blankets, and kindness. For months, strangers became neighbors. They spoke of horrors the city had been spared. Cities flattened, children lost, lives undone. And yet in the valley, they found a kind of healing. One refugee years later wrote, "I survived not because of armies or governments, but because of a quiet city that had nothing to give but peace, and gave it freely."